of the Midwifery Joint Committee. The 2024 annual meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will now convene. This meeting is being held virtually via Microsoft Teams and is being recorded for record purposes. During discussion or to ask questions in this virtual meeting, committee members should identify themselves by name before addressing the matter. Moderator Abby Lefevre will now conduct an official roll call for declaration of a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey. Please respond present when your name is called. Dr. Amy Steele. Dr. Amy Steele. Thought she was on. Dr. Steele, are you on the meeting? Okay, we'll come back to her. Dr. Alan Rosenbaum. Dr. LaDonna Thomas.
Present.
Meg Barrett.
Present.
Dr. Raquel Ingram.
Present.
Dr. Sharona Johnson.
Present.
Dr. Dev Sanghvi.
Present.
Joshua Malcolm. Stephanie Godfrey.
Present.
Dr. Carolyn Haraway Smith previously notified board staff that she would not be available for this meeting. Ms. Godfrey, we do have a quorum for this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Lefevre. In accordance with the State Ethics Act and the Code of Conduct for members of the Midwifery Joint Committee, it is the duty of every member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict. Are there any committee members with a known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before the committee today? If so, please identify yourself and the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any undue participation in the matter. We will conduct this meeting in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order. Following discussion of any motions, I will call for a motion and a second prior to a roll call vote for all committee members. When making a motion, the committee member shall state their name for record-keeping purposes. If there's a motion to amend the main motion on the floor, the amended motion will be acted on prior to any action on the main motion. If the amendment is defeated, the main motion as originally stated will be voted on. If an amendment passes, the main motion as amended will be voted on. The committee would like to welcome newly appointed members from the Medical Board, Dr. Dev Sanghvi and Joshua Malcolm. We are now at the open comment period portion of our agenda. The purpose of the open comment period is to provide members of the public an opportunity to share their concerns, offer views, and present questions regarding issues that impact midwifery and midwifery regulation. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address the committee?
I don't believe we had anybody in advance of today's meeting request to speak as well.
Okay. It doesn't look like there's any chats or hands. So at this time, we have no request to speak during the open comment period. Therefore, we will move on to the next agenda item, the approval of minutes. The minutes from the November 14th, 2023 annual meeting have been submitted for your review and approval. In addition, the minutes from called meetings held on April 29th, August 19th, and October 9th, 2024 have also been submitted for your review and approval. Are there any question or discussion regarding any of these submitted minutes? Okay, do I have a motion then regarding approval of the minutes from November 14th, 2023?
So moved.
Sorry, can you tell me who you are?
I'm sorry, this is Dev Sanghvi. So moved.
Thank you. Dr. Sanghvi has made a motion regarding the approval of minutes for November 14th, 2023. Do I have a second?
Second. This is Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele?
Approved.
Dr. Thomas?
Approved.
Meg Barrett?
Approved.
Dr. Ingram?
Approved.
Dr. Johnson?
Approved.
Dr. Sanghvi?
Approve.
And Stephanie Godfrey? Approve.
I'm sorry, just to mention Alan Rosenbaum.
Oh, Alan Rosenbaum, here we are. Do you also approve of the November 14th, 2023 meeting minutes?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, approved. Do I have a motion regarding the approval of the minutes from the other three called meetings in April, August, and October?
Madam Chair, this is Amy Steele. I move to accept the minutes from the additional 3 meetings we had in 2023
Thank you, Dr. Steele. Do I have a
and
second?
24.
Yeah.
I second Meg Barrett.
Meg Barrett has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or oppose if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Thomas,
Approve.
Meg Barrett,
Approve.
Dr. Ingram,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Dr. Sangbai,
Approve.
and Stephanie Godfrey approve. So motion carries for both the November meeting from 2023 and the 3 meetings from 2024. The next item on today's agenda is an update on the rulemaking progress. At this time, I'd like to invite Meredith Paris, Chief Legal Officer of the Board of Nursing, to present.
Thank you, Ms. Godfrey. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm glad to report that your permanent rules were approved by the Rules Review Commission and were entered in the code on October 1st of 2024. You guys worked tirelessly, as you can see from the minutes over the past 2 years to get these moving, and we really appreciate it. Because those rules were entered in the code, the only other update I have for the committee is that the periodic review for the committee is anticipated to begin in May of 2026, and that's when we will be notified of the initial list of categories for rulemaking for periodic review. So there's nothing needed at this time, and no additional rules are anticipated needed by staff until that point, unless new legislation arises or something else happens that's unforeseen.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Paris. For your own review, the next agenda item is the listing of certified nurse midwives' initial approvals and independent practice approvals between November 1st, 2023 and October 31st, 2024. At this time, we'll proceed with a summary of activities. Meredith Paris will present the disciplinary action report for informational purposes, and it's available should you have any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will also be a very brief update on the investigations. We currently have 4 open cases and investigations. Out of those 4, we do have 1 awaiting hearing. That midwife is currently inactive and not practicing. You'll note in the disciplinary report or summary of the investigation report that of the cases that we have been investigating from the last annual meeting, we closed 8 cases with no further action or accept as information, 1 with a letter of concern, which was a private letter of concern, and 1 with a non-disciplinary consent order, which is a private matter, private contract that requires remediation on the part of the licensee. That would be the update. And as far as investigation goes, again, there's 4 pending right now. I did want to update the committee. As of today's date, we have a total of 505 midwives in North Carolina. Out of that 505, as of this morning, 229 are independent CNMs, and 276 are those with a collaborative provider.
Thank you, Ms. Paris. Hema Parmer, accountant for the Board of Nursing, will now present the financial report for your information.
Good afternoon, Godfrey. Like Ms. Godfrey said, my name is Hema Parmer, and I'm the staff accountant here at the North Carolina Board of Nursing, and I'll be presenting and starting with the statement of net position, also known as the balance sheet for the Midwifery Joint Committee. I'm going to share my screen just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the total asset equal 41,236 as of June 30th, 2024. We had to cash in the certificate of deposit to cover the liabilities during the year. Total liability equal 34,234. Mainly, that's comprised of outstanding reimbursement to North Carolina Board of Nursing per agreement and unearned portion of deferred renewal fees. Which brings the total net position to 7,002 at the end of June 30th, which is about 84% decrease from the last year. Looking at the statement of revenue, expense, and change in net position, total revenue was 41,232. And majority of those revenue made up the approval to practice application. And as Ms. Paris mentioned, independent practice were the majority of it. Out of 231, 195 were the independent practice and 36 were collaborative provider. Renewals had a slight decrease from compared to last year. Your expenses were 77,616 at the end of June, which is 150% increase from the same period last year. Again, majority of it is due to the Senate Bill 20 implementation cost, which was about 45,147, bringing your net position at a loss of 36,336. Beginning of the year, net position was 43,338, and as of end of June, the net position was 7,002. Any questions? That is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parma. We kind of briefly talked about this at the annual meeting last year, which was kind of this theoretical question of what happens when the MJC runs out of money. The increase in, so it cost about twice as much for me to get an independent practice midwifery license because it was kind of like a new license as opposed to my renewal. So I think even the kind of jump in increased revenue that we had this year, we will likely not match that next year because I'll be a renewal. All the people who are now considered to have independent licenses or independent approval to practice will now be renewals in 2025. I think we kind of were considering options to hear proposal from the Board of Nursing about what it would look like to be kind of the Midwifery Joint Committee to be brought under the Board of Nursing umbrella. Is that something that the MJC as a group, is that something we should be looking to explore? And I don't know, Ms. Paris, if you're the right person to ask kind of what the next steps would be for that, or is this something that we truly wait until our balance is either zero or in the negative?
So I didn't anticipate that discussion today. I do think you guys can see the numbers, and I agree based on the trends that I spoke with for licensure. It doesn't look like the revenue is going to increase substantially to get your budget back to where it needs to be. Good news is, though, is that because rulemaking has finished, you won't have as many called meetings or staff costs associated with the budget. So I believe that from the last annual meeting, it was suggested that the medical board staff and nursing board staff have these discussions to present to the committee at such time as needed. And to date, we don't have a proposal for the committee.
Dr. Sangbai?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we're looking at future years' revenue being decreased, I think I understand that the renewals are going to generate less revenue than the initial approvals to practice. Would we also see a corresponding decrease in the administrative expense? I know you said a lot of that was related to Senate Bill 20 and maybe additional meetings, because I think, that 40%, $42,000 increase really is the reason why there was such a discrepancy between fiscal 23 and 24. So has there been any forecast on operating expenses, particularly in that administrative line for this year going forward?
So I'm sorry, Ms. Godfrey.
I think as far as I know, that should be significantly less than it was in 24 and even less than 3, because that's when this process started. I think the only unforeseen circumstances are like big disciplinary cases. So I think that part's a little bit unpredictable. So when we had gotten the financial presentation last year, the recommendation was that we have was it 50? I don't remember. I'm sorry if somebody else was on the meeting also. It was like 50% of operating budget we should be having kind of on retainer. And it looks like 7,000 is less than that, no matter how we predict it. I think that I certainly don't know that we need to do anything about it right at this meeting, but kind of wanted to make sure that it was on everybody on the MJC's kind of radar in case we needed to do something before November of 2025. Unless somebody has really good like fundraising ideas or t-shirt sales, maybe.
I think we've talked about this before, but this is high, raising the rates.
Meg, we can't really hear you very well.
Oh. Better? No?
Not really.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Dr. Sangbai, I just wanted to add that the budget itself, you're correct, that a lot of the operational expenses related to new legislation that was unforeseen. As Ms. Godfrey pointed out too, there was a significant investigation that was conducted prior to that involved a lot of expert reviews, which is not typically historically been the case. And so that was the first decrease in the budget. I want to say that was 2022.
If I can just interrupt for a second, what Ms. Godfrey had pointed out that it is suggested for governmental agency to have about 3 to 6 months of operating reserve just to cover unforeseen circumstances that come up. So that kind of gives you about midwifery committee needs to have about 8,000 to 16,000 in the reserve.
I guess that's kind of where I'm confused because we don't have that. I think it's not projected to get any more revenue. Meg, I see your question. I think it's a great question. And we had brought that up at either last meeting or the meeting before. And that's a legislative change. So that has to be changed. And Ms. Paris, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I remember the answer to that question being that has to be set forth through a law change, that we can't just decide how much it costs to have a license or how much it costs to renew it. That was actually written into the Senate bill.
That's correct. You would have to go through the legislature.
Yeah. So I guess my question is just, do we need to be doing something if we know that we only have $7,000 and we know that that's not enough to potentially cover 3 to 6 months? Do we need to be doing something about this now? Is this a proposal we should be exploring, or a conversation we should be exploring? Is that the MJC's responsibility to start that conversation, or do we kind of tread water until it's a forefront issue? I guess I'm not sure if that's a question for the financial department of the Board of Nursing, or I don't really know whose responsibility that is. And if it's mine, I am wildly unprepared to handle that. Dr. Sangbai.
Yeah, my thoughts are, if there is a sense that the revenue is not going to significantly increase, we might just be kicking the can for the next team who's going to be left with the same thing. So similarly, not sure what the solution would be, certainly for today, but it may be worthwhile kind of thinking about what the options are in the absence of licensee fee increases, which will take too long, I think, to get through any type of approval process. What are the other sources of funding that the MJC could actually look to?
I'm going to jump in, Hema, and correct me if I'm wrong, sorry. But because this is an independent committee, the fees itself the budget and the operating account comes from the licensure fees. So there wouldn't or is not another way to raise those fees. At one point in time, I believe they did have the certificate of deposit that they were able to kind of keep and renew interest. But my understanding, and Hema, please correct me, is that obviously that we're not in that position anymore.
That's correct. The main revenue is from the renewal and initial applications. And we did cash in the city last year just to cover the expenses because we had the Senate bill implementation costs coming in.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here without necessarily obligating any organization, probably only for my clarification. Is the MJC then prohibited from, quite frankly, just simply getting money from the Board of Nursing and the Medical Board? I mean, we're not talking a huge amount of money here in order to kind of keep that reserve, but is there something that prevents the MJC from actually looking to its two partners, if you will, as for a funding source?
Ms. Bellamy.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, committee members. Last year, I was actually the one that presented the financial statements, and yes, there was a significant expenditure for implementation of the new Senate bill. One thing I will say is that the Board of Nursing already has an operating agreement with Midwifery. So the revenue that is received from the renewals and the initial applications, there's already a revenue share agreement with the Board of Nursing. And that was based on anticipated costs, overhead costs of the functioning of the Midwifery Committee. So I'm also on unfamiliar territory as to, we know that the revenue comes from the Act, the Nursing Practice Act, is where the revenue for sustaining independent boards comes from. We're not allowed, obviously, to go to the state for additional funds. It is in our law that we have licensing fees that should sustain us. So I don't have an answer as to where additional revenue could come from. And I know that does not answer the question.
Mr. Jimison.
Good afternoon, Ms. Godfrey. To Ms. Bellamy and Dr. Singhvai's point, especially with regard to Dr. Singhvai's question about could the medical board or the nursing board, for lack of a better word, donate or subsidize the midwifery committee, I believe the answer to that question is yes. But of course, that's a policy decision to be made by all three entities, the nursing board, the medical board, and the midwifery committee. When this issue was discussed soon after the last year's annual meeting, certain discussions were had, and when a presentation was made during the Allied Health Committee about the medical board has a similar setup with another licensee called the perfusionist. For all intent and purposes, the medical board subsidizes the regulation of perfusionists in this state. It's very unlikely that the perfusionist revenue that are brought in through their licensing fees cover the cost of staff time for licensing and investigating those few cases that do involve perfusionists. So we made the offer, or made the offer to discuss, not the offer to actually extend, but the offer to discuss all these options, including, again, for lack of a better word, donating medical board staff time to help with any of the functions of the midwifery committee. That was an option. Again, it was not an option that was agreed upon. It was just an option thrown out on the table. So there are, creative options that can be discussed and perhaps pursued. And the last that Ms. Paris and I discussed this, I believe there was some agreement that we would continue to have these discussions as much as and as many as discussions as the committee would like us to have to explore additional options.
Thanks. Ms. Bellamy, are you able to speak to what services the Board of Nursing already provides? I think when we're looking for a solution moving forward, it's important to understand what the Board of Nursing already does for the MJC.
Yes, bear with me. I will pull the operating agreement.
Thanks. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I have some of it, but I just want to sort of some of the and I am going to attempt to share my screen so that we can see the agreement.
Ms. Bellamy, while you're pulling that up, I can kind of summarize some of the services if that's helpful.
Right. I have it. I don't know if you can see this.
I cannot.
Okay. Well, I'll just run through them really quickly. So the agreement with the
I'm sorry, I'll share the screen. So
okay, thank you, Hema. So the agreement with the Board of Nursing is that, first of all, that Midwifery is an independent organization. They provide you can see the personnel services that they provide, secretarial, for licensure, clerical assistance. In exchange, you can see the revenue split there, 55% of the revenue for applications and 60% for the renewal. The board also provides IT services, obviously finance and bookkeeping services under the agreement. And the investigations are direct costs to the midwifery, since we never know how many of those investigations are going to happen. So the board provides the overhead expense basically to house the midwifery committee in the office here at 4516 Lake Boone Trail. That's part of the agreement. I think I've pretty much covered everything. Insurance is it's a direct cost to the midwifery. There is a requirement that midwifery have commercial general liability insurance, as well as directors and officers. So those are direct costs to the midwifery. So that's a very broad overview of the services that are currently provided by North Carolina Board of Nursing in accordance with the operating agreement with the Midwifery Joint Committee.
Thanks, Ms. Bellamy. I think that maybe in preparation either for the next annual meeting or potentially if our funds kind of reach closer to zero, it would be beneficial to talk to the Board of Nursing and to the medical board in order to find ways to continue the MJC functioning the way that it is, whether that is with, I mean, I think that there's potential options, right? Whether that is funding or whether that's a rewriting of the agreement that we already have in between the Board of Nursing and the MJC. So I don't know if I need to call a motion to that, but I would direct staff that is currently supporting the Midwifery Joint Committee to bring options to the table so that we don't feel like, as Dr. Sangbhai said, kicking the can down the road for the next lucky group that gets to pick up the baton. Dr. Sangbhai, did you have more to add?
I did. I think that's a great idea. And I think what might help, at least from the medical board perspective, if HEMA or anyone else from the joint subcommittee could give us a sense of what that deficit looks like, and maybe not just for 1 year, but maybe forecasting out future years and so forth. Because if it looks like there is a model for the Board of Nursing and Medical Board to support, and it's an annual allocation or something like that, it just might be easier to have that in some degree of consistency. I don't want to say perpetuity, but at least some degree of consistency. So again, we don't have to, that way that the next group doesn't have to worry about the same issues all over again.
Ms. Paris, do I need to call for a vote to have staff present options, or is that just something that I get to ask for?
I think you can direct staff as a committee based on the discussion. It seems like that's what needs to happen regardless. So we can present those, as you said, at the next annual meeting, or if it looks like there's a significant decrease for whatever reason between now and then, we can do a called meeting if that's required.
Perfect. I'm happy with that. Which is a great transition to our next topic, which is election of chair. So on January 1st, 2023, Dr. LaDonna Thomas and I began serving a 2-year term as vice chair and chair respectively. At this time, we need to address electing a chair and vice chair to serve for the next 2 years. Historically, both the chair and the vice chair have been filled by midwives. And so I will kind of volunteer myself to continue to be chair for the next 2 years if that's something that the group is happy with. And I think Meg Barrett is also willing to be co-chair, just to put that out there so nobody feels like they're being volunteered. Are there any nominations for chair?
If I may, I think the committee needs to understand that they need to renominate you, Ms. Godfrey. So if someone wants to speak up,
if they want me to be
she
here,
can renominate herself.
Thank you for that clarification. Then I vote to renominate Ms. Godfrey for chair.
Perfect. I guess so Stephanie Godfrey has been nominated for committee chair to serve a 2-year term beginning January 25. And I do consent to this nomination. Are there any further nominations for chair? Great. Hearing none, may I have a second motion to nominate myself, Stephanie Godfrey, as the incoming committee chair?
Meg Barrett seconded. Sorry.
Oh, do I have to do both of them at the same time? No, that's it.
You can, yeah, Meg, pretty good.
Meg seconded it as well.
Perfect.
So
it's just hard to hear. Thank you. Perfect. I will call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you're in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Steele?
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum?
Approve.
Dr. Thomas?
Approved.
Meg Barrett?
Approved.
Dr. Ingram?
Approved.
Dr. Johnson?
Approved.
Dr. Sangbhai?
Approve.
And Stephanie Godfrey, approve. Motion carries. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Meg Barrett. This is Sharona Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Meg Barrett has been nominated for committee vice chair to serve a 2-year term beginning January 1st, 2025. Meg Barrett, do you consent to this nomination?
I do.
Are there any further nominations for vice chair? Okay, hearing none, may I have a second motion to nominate Meg Barrett as the incoming committee vice chair?
I second that nomination.
Thanks, Dr. Sangbai. Any discussion? I will now call for a vote. When your name is called, please respond approve if you are in favor of the motion or opposed if you're not in favor of the motion. Dr. Amy Steele,
Approved.
Dr. Rosenbaum,
Approve.
Dr. Thomas,
Approve.
Meg Barrett,
Approve.
Dr. Ingram,
Approve.
Dr. Johnson,
Approved.
Dr. Sangbai,
Approve.
and Stephanie Godfrey approve. Motion carries. Congratulations to myself and Meg Barrett for another 2 years. Thank you. Yes, this concludes the agenda for the 2024 annual meeting. The next annual meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee will take place on November 18th, 2025. Thank you for your attendance and participation at this annual meeting of the Midwifery Joint Committee. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn, Alan Rosenbaum.
Dr. Rosenbaum has made a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Raquel Ingram, second.
Dr. Ingram has seconded the motion. Now that we have a second, I will call for a vote. All in favor say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Thanks. Any opposed? Great. Motion carries. Thank you. This concludes today's meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.